I'm making a coffee table out of 4 2x8s and 1 2x3, which cost me $34.60 because this is the missing piece our living room needs. So I brought home the boards and cut them all long ways to get rid of the round edges because this would make the tabletop smooth when they're all connected. Then I cross-cut all the boards to make 5 of them the length of the table and 8 pieces for the height of the table. Then made pocket holes so I could have a place for screws to discreetly fasten the boards together on the underneath side of each piece. Then using those pocket holes, I put together a tabletop, and you may notice 2 pieces on the sides are slightly shorter because I created a notch for the legs to go for a nice design feature. Using pocket holes to attach these pieces allows the boards to come together seamlessly without screws interrupting the top surface of the coffee table. Then I attached a 2x3 on the underneath side of the table to strengthen the whole thing. This design is almost exactly like a table I've made before, so be sure to check out that YouTube video I made if you're interested in more. Then when it came time to put this whole thing together, I honestly had no idea how I made this thing happen, so you can just watch. You can see I used lots of wood glue, lots of clamps, then used lots of screws to hopefully make this thing strong enough to keep itself together. And because this thing is so heavy, it's important that all these connections are very secure. Then it started getting late, so tomorrow I'll show you how I remove some imperfections and make this thing super smooth. I'm building a coffee table that my wife and I designed, and this might be the heaviest table I've ever made. And you can see when you look at it up close, it looks pretty ugly, so let's make it pretty. So I'm gonna take the roughest sandpaper I got to remove any of the imperfections. We're also gonna fix the big cracks in between the joints here. So I'm starting with an 80 grit sandpaper because the only thing I need to do is remove wood material to make all the corners and edges even. Once I'm done with each round of sanding, I always remove dust and wipe the surface down to pick up any leftover particles. I was able to knock off all the major imperfections, so now I'm going to use wood filler to fill all these little cracks. It's important to make sure I work this wood filler into the cracks because once it dries, I'll be able to sand it away and anything left over will become a part of the permanent surface. We've given it a couple hours, so let's see how it looks. For this round of sanding, I use typically 120 to 180 grit because I'm less focused on removing material and more focused on smoothing out the surface. The table's looking good, but tomorrow I'll show you what I do to make it look amazing. Okay, we have a good looking table, but this is always my favorite part. This is a wood router, and it's designed to carve details out of the corners of the wood. And the specific bit I'm using will create a simple rounded edge to eliminate any sharp corners. Did I mention this thing's heavy? So by doing that, I rounded off all the corners, gave it a very nice, consistent, and uniform look. And I'm gonna sand it with a fine grit, and that's gonna make it look super smooth and take away all these burn marks. This is the next round of sanding, so I'm using a 220 grit to make smooth surfaces even smoother. Now we're gonna sand the rest of the piece with a fine grit of sandpaper. The dust I'm creating from the sander is very fine, so it's important that I use a mask even if I'm working outside. Once I'm done sanding, I always like to wipe it down to pick up all the dust, so that way when I sand it with a super fine grit, I'll avoid any scratches. It's starting to get late and dark, but I would love to finish sanding this thing today. I spent several hours building the table, and spending a few hours on making the table smooth is also time very well spent. Okay, we are done. I'm ready to stain this coffee table, but this room is a complete mess, so I need to clean that up before we get started. I built this entire coffee table outside, but I need to come inside for the staining and clear coat process because there's no dust blowing in here. But also before I stain the coffee table, I want to create a few stain samples so we can make sure we're picking the right stain. Oh, I wish I had a bigger workshop. This room is looking better. Now let's test the samples. We got 4 stain colors sorted by light to dark. Let's just try one at a time and see what we think. First up, Ipswich Pine. We haven't used this on our home yet, but I have used it before. Let's see what we think. It's very light. I don't know about this. Okay. Next up, Early American, one of my favorites, but we also use it a lot, so I don't want to overuse it. Next up, Provincial, another one of my favorites, a good medium stain. Last up, Ebony, very dark stain. Oh my goodness, that is dark. I'm gonna set these 4 samples up in the living room and share it on IG. Let me know what you guys think. Let's see if this works. Oh my gosh. It looks light, but this thing is solid wood, so it's pretty heavy. Heck yeah. Okay, so I'll be able to stain the bottom side first and then flip it over, stain the top side, let it dry, and it'll be ready. Perfect. This coffee table is ready to be stained, so let's flip it upside down. Do that side first, and then we'll flip it right side up. But before we put a color on it, let's put a pre-stain conditioner on it, so that way the stain looks as good as possible. By applying this pre-stain on, it's going to allow stain to be received much more consistently, and it's going to look a lot better because of it. We want to make sure we get full coverage with this thing, otherwise it'll definitely show when we stain it. I always do the top side last, so that way it has the opportunity to dry without me having to move it again. Okay, now we let it dry, and then we'll be ready to stain here in about a half hour. Alright, I've given it some time, so let's wipe the excess off, flip it over, and this thing's ready to receive some color. I always like wearing gloves because walking around with stained hands usually isn't a good look. Now, we did not think we were going to pick this stain color, but the winner is this one. We prefer having a variety of wood tones in our home, but we always seem to find ourselves using the color Early American. Alright, let's flip it over. And again, making sure the table is right side up as I finish staining is important because I don't want to touch fresh stain before it dries, so I always do the important side last. I really like how the end grain appears different from the rest of the table. It gives it a pretty cool look. Let me know what you guys think. Last thing I need to do before this coffee table is complete is put a clear coat on it, so let's show you how that's done. I'm using polyurethane and a soft brush to get this done, and you want to make sure this is stirred really well. And it's all about just making nice, long, smooth strokes. You can see that by putting this on, it makes the grain look so much more rich. But the reason I'm putting this on is to protect the wood. Okay, one coat is on, so we're going to wait about 4 or 5 hours, wait for it to dry. I'll buff it up, and then we'll put a second coat on, and it'll be completely ready. To keep the brush fresh in the meantime, I like to use mineral spirits or some sort of paint thinner, just to keep the brush soft and clean. Otherwise, in a couple hours, this thing will be super crusty and hard and unusable for the second coat. Stick that in there. Let it do its thing, keep it fresh, and we'll come back soon. I want the coffee table I'm making for my wife to last forever, so applying multiple coats of polyurethane on this table is going to protect the wood for a very long time. And as always, I'm starting on the bottom. It's important to protect all surfaces because the stuff will slightly change the appearance of wood as well. Always be careful with the dribbles and brush out any streaks as you see them. Bottom side is done. Let's carefully flip this over. I made a whole series making this coffee table if you missed any of my previous videos, so go check them out because you could easily do this yourself. Now all that's left is to let this dry for a few days, then carry it into our living room.
Yeah.
Just like we drew it up, right? And what makes this so cool is that we have a spot to slide our ottoman underneath it whenever we don't feel like using it. Then the way Gabby places the decor on it always makes it look way better.